The Honourable Member for Bonavista, Gander, Grand Falls, Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is an honour again to stand here. I say again because the last time this bill came in the House, I spoke on it briefly as well. I want to thank the member from Mississauga-Cooksville for bringing this to the floor of the House of Commons. In the last session, it was brought in by the member from Brampton West, Andrew Kanya. And I want to quote from his speech, but I'll get to that in just a few moments. I want to reiterate what was said earlier about the true inspiration of a man who traveled this world seeking out peace, seeking out ways to bridge the gaps that between the human dynamic between us and those people that we may not agree with, those people that we find ourselves in constant conflict with. Here was a man who was situated in a position that was clear to the world where he was, which was the head of the Catholic Church of this world, situated in Vatican City. But yet, he managed to bridge the gap between so many different factions of people, the religion, as well as nations around the world. As someone said earlier, 129 countries the man visited in the existence of his 27-year rule as the leader of the Catholic Church. It's absolutely incredible. I myself, I am not Catholic, but I sure am inspired by the actions of this particular individual as a world leader at the time when the world needed it, from the late 1970s up until his passing of 2005. So it is an honor, yes, to be here tonight and to talk about this. And I want to thank those for listening to me, and I want to thank my party for giving me this honor. I will be supporting this particular bill indeed. And I just want to start out by saying that I remember his first words from October 16th, 1978, and he said, "Dear brothers and sisters, we are still grieved after the death of our most beloved John Paul I, and now the eminent cardinals have called a new bishop of Rome. They have called him from a far country, far but always near, through the communion of faith and in the Christian tradition." And those were his first words. Of the new Pope, John Paul II, formerly Karol Wojtyla, the first Slavic Pope in the history of the Roman Catholic Church, and a Pope that reigned 27 years. I'm very honored to speak, as I mentioned, to designate this particular day. We have honored other world leaders, including those Christian leaders, religious leaders, such as people like the Dalai Lama and others. And we've also honored great leaders of certain nations. I mean, let's put John Paul II in the category of each and every one of those as a world leader, as a religious leader, a leader of faith, a leader of nations, and of course a leader in the world of diplomacy, which is a huge, huge thing to do over his 27 years. Some credit him with the fall of communism. But his roots were within the Polish community, within Poland itself, and that put him in a very distinct position of understanding through the years of growing up in Poland. Here are a couple of things that Canadian journalists had to say after the passing of Pope John Paul II. Canadian reporter Eric Margolis described going into the Central Committee headquarters in Moscow after the election of John Paul II. Here's what he described. He says he was the first journalist inside the KGB headquarters in 1990. The generals told him at that time the Vatican and the Pope, above all, was regarded as their #1 most dangerous enemy in the world, the communist government of that day. And he is one of the architects of the defeat of communism. There is no doubt about it. He must be remembered not only for his religious ties and role, but for his worldwide historical influence. In terms of his role in the fall of communism, I mentioned one reporter. Here's another one from James Carroll. He is not only a writer, but a former priest himself. And he says, "What is the greatest, most unexpected event of the 20th century?" He says, "Isn't it that the Soviet Empire was brought down non-violently?" Non-violent way of bringing down one of the largest empire this world has ever seen. And that is the Soviet Empire. And then he goes on to say, "Isn't it John Paul II's story part of that?" And I would say it's a big part of that. Because what came from that was his desire to see that impoverished people were able to fulfill dreams, to fulfill the dream of feeding their own families, fulfill the dream of worshiping as they so choose to do. And he became such a large part of the world dialogue over peace that everywhere he went, the world attention followed him because they knew that he was the type of individual to make sure that he would bridge the gulf between warring factions, those who conflicted with each other. And that is the big reason why we're here today, to honor a man. It's not just a national honor, but it is an international honor here in this national forum. As I said earlier, the Soviet Union did fall without one bullet being fired, but John Paul's 1979 trip to Poland is described as the, quote, the fulcrum of revolution, which led to the collapse of communism. That's how Timothy Ash put it. He says, without the Pope, no solidarity. Without solidarity, no Gorbachev. Without Gorbachev, no fall of communism. In fact, Michael Gorbachev himself said, quote, it would have been impossible without the Pope. He credits Pope John Paul II for being the key factor in the fall of the Soviet Union. Now, there is another major accomplishment of John Paul II. Nobody will agree with everything that any leader ever does, of course, but which is to be expected. But he did bridge the divide between Roman Catholic Church and other religions, as I mentioned earlier. In October 2003, the Anti-Defamation League issued a statement congratulating Pope John Paul II on entering his 25th year of the papacy and essentially complimenting him for his role in bridging the divide between the Jewish faith and the Roman Catholic Church. Immediately after John Paul II's death, the same Anti-Defamation League issued a statement that Pope John Paul II had revolutionized Catholic-Jewish relations, saying that, quote, more change for the better took place in his 27-year papacy than in the nearly 2,000 years before. What a statement to say for the Anti-Defamation League. He accomplished in 27 years what could not be accomplished to that extent in 2,000 years prior to that. Other examples of his attempts to bridge with other faith communities. In terms of his Muslim community, Pope John Paul himself, when he was in Casablanca on August 19, 1985, during his journey to Morocco, said, quote, Christians and Muslims, we have many things in common as believers and as human beings. We live in the same world, marked by many signs of hope, but also by multiple signs of anguish. For us, Abraham is a very model of faith in God, of submission to his will, and of confidence in his goodness. We believe in the same God, the one God, the living God, the God who created the world and brings his creatures to their perfection. He reached out to the Muslim community once again, 1986. He also said that the Jewish religion is not extrinsic to us, but in a certain way is intrinsic to our own religion. With Judaism, therefore, we have a relationship which we do not have with any other religion. You are our dearly beloved brothers. In a certain way, it could be said that you are our older brothers. Amazing compliment for a man. And it took, let's face it, it took he was extremely brave to be saying these things. No other pope had said this prior to this. This was a man who had obviously sincere in his beliefs in the church and the Roman Catholic faith, but he was so sincere in his attempts to bridge the gulf between what conflicts us that he was willing to put himself on the line to say these things. It was controversial at the time. I remember when it happened in the mid-'80s. Just as a personal story, speaking of which, I come from Newfoundland and Labrador, the little island of Newfoundland. The Pope visited the little island of Newfoundland. And with it came an incredible sense of patriotism in our own province. We could not get over the fact Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, Jews who lived in Newfoundland all said this: we cannot believe the Pope is actually coming to our little piece of the earth. This little corner of the earth. We called our own in the North Atlantic. The weather's not great. And I'm sure the Pope did experience that. But we were so proud to have this man of such great international historical significance was there. Why? Because he wanted to be there. Because he wanted to spread the word. He wanted to take this word that he had from the Word of God and bring it around the world. A word of God, yes, but peace and love and happiness. An incredible honor. This is just a mild gesture that we can make in this house to have this particular bill passed. I would like to quote from my former colleague, Andrew Kanya, who spoke eloquently when he brought this bill to the House. And he said many things about how the Pope would travel the world, as I mentioned earlier, and how he tried to bridge the gap between other religions. He said, "This was a Pope who will go down in history as not only one of the greatest popes, but one of the greatest world leaders. Somebody who did try to reach out to different communities, different religions, and show respect. He did not go around saying that the Roman Catholic Church was right and other religions were wrong. He went around saying, let us work together and try to be good, help and respect one another, and show love and compassion. A love and compassion that we still feel to this day as if he was still with us. And in many respects, Mr. Speaker, he is still with us, and that's one of the chief reasons why we should pass this legislation. Thank you very much."
Resuming